During the consistory, most eyes were fixed elsewhere. Reporters tracked visible alliances, diplomatic signals, and the familiar choreography of church politics. Analysts focused on who stood where, who spoke with whom, and what it might mean for future geopolitical balances. It all felt important, urgent, and worthy of headlines. Yet while attention drifted toward those surface movements, something quieter unfolded that carried far greater weight for the life of the Church itself. It came not as a dramatic declaration, not as a manifesto, but as a brief intervention that could easily have passed unnoticed. The words were measured, almost pastoral in tone, and at first hearing even reassuring. But their significance lay not in their style, but in their source. The speaker was Victor Manuel Fernandez, prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. That detail changes everything. This was not a local bishop offering a personal reflection, nor a theologian speculating at the margins. This was the head of the very body charged with safeguarding, defending, and transmitting the integrity of Catholic doctrine. From that position, words do not float freely. They carry institutional weight. They shape direction. They signal priorities. Fernandez reportedly urged bishops and cardinals not to become obsessed with doctrine and moral norms. Instead, he encouraged them to focus ecclesial action on what he described as the heart of the evangelical message. Taken alone, the phrase sounds benign. Few would argue against placing the gospel at the center of the Church's mission. Yet once the statement is examined more closely, and once its implications are traced, a deeper tension begins to emerge. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. The issue is not whether the gospel should be proclaimed. That has never been in question. The problem lies in the way proclamation is implicitly set against doctrine and moral norms, as if these were distractions or burdens rather than integral elements of the Christian message. In the language attributed to the prefect, doctrine appears not as the framework that gives the gospel clarity and substance, but as something that can become an unhealthy fixation. The word obsession is doing real work here. It does not suggest balance or discernment. It suggests excess, rigidity, and distortion. This marks a shift in perspective. Doctrine is no longer presented as the foundation that makes the proclamation intelligible, but as a potential obstacle to mission. The message, by contrast, is treated as something almost self-sufficient, capable of standing on its own without firm doctrinal content. In this framework, doctrine becomes an accessory, secondary at best, and at worst a harmful complication that risks obscuring what truly matters. To support this approach, Fernandez recalled the principle known as the hierarchy of truths. This is not an invention. It is a recognized theological concept within the Church, traditionally used to show the internal coherence of the deposit of faith. Properly understood, it helps explain how different teachings relate to one another without denying or diminishing any of them. But in recent practice, the principle has often been applied in a far more ambiguous way. Rather than illuminating the unity of Catholic teaching, it has sometimes functioned as a selective filter. Certain truths are declared central and emphasized repeatedly, while others are quietly pushed to the margins. They are not formally rejected, but they are treated as less urgent, less binding, or culturally inconvenient. The theory may sound subtle, but the consequences are concrete. Once it is asserted that not all truths carry equal weight, the unavoidable question arises: who decides which truths can be sidelined, and on what authority? This is not a merely academic concern. In the recent life of the Church, this approach has already produced visible fragmentation. In the name of pastoral sensitivity, teachings that were once presented with clarity and consistency have been treated as optional in practice. They are rarely denied outright, but they are softened, ignored, or reinterpreted to the point that their original meaning becomes difficult to recognize. The result is not unity in diversity, but confusion. It is here that the paradox of Fernandez's role becomes impossible to ignore. The prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith is not tasked with crafting new pastoral strategies or experimenting with flexible language. His mandate is continuity. He is meant to ensure that what is handed on remains faithful to what was received. When someone in that position urges church leaders not to insist on doctrine and moral norms, the resulting tension is not incidental. It strikes at the core of the office itself. In the vision implied by the prefect's words, proclamation is described primarily as an encounter, an experience, a first announcement that should come before everything else. Encounter is certainly part of the Christian life. But in the Catholic tradition, encounter has never been separated from truth. The apostles did not proclaim a vague message of goodwill. They preached a concrete faith. They called people to conversion, to obedience, to a way of life shaped by commandments and belief. The encounter with Christ was inseparable from adherence to revealed truth. When proclamation is detached from doctrine, it becomes something else entirely. It turns into a fluid experience that can be shaped according to context, culture, and personal sensibility. This kind of message can be adapted endlessly, polished for communication, and adjusted to avoid friction. It may be effective in attracting attention or reducing resistance. But it risks losing the substance that makes the gospel what it is. This shift did not emerge in a vacuum. Without drawing forced connections, it is difficult to deny that the language used by Fernandez fits within a broader ecclesial pattern that has developed over time. In recent years, controversial documents and practices have already introduced uncertainty into areas that were once considered settled. The invitation not to emphasize doctrine and norms aligns with that trajectory. It is part of a broader transformation in which clarity is often treated as a liability rather than a strength. The effects of this approach are visible at the local level. Across dioceses, practices diverge sharply. Moral teachings are interpreted differently depending on geography. What is taught in one place may be quietly set aside in another. The faithful encounter a church that no longer speaks with a consistent voice, not because of legitimate cultural expression, but because of a lack of shared reference points. Increasingly, what is permitted or encouraged depends on the disposition of individual pastors rather than on a common understanding of the faith. This fragmentation breeds disorientation. Believers are left unsure of what the Church actually teaches, or whether its teachings carry any binding force. Over time, this uncertainty becomes normalized. The absence of clear boundaries is framed as openness. The avoidance of firm language is described as mercy. Yet the cost of this approach is high. A church that cannot articulate what it believes cannot convincingly invite others to believe it. What makes the situation more striking is the silence that followed Fernandez's reported remarks. There were no major denials, no official clarifications, no serious institutional debate. In ecclesiastical contexts, silence rarely signals insignificance. More often, it suggests discomfort or tacit approval. Words are spoken, reactions are muted, and the underlying direction continues unchanged. The greatest danger is not immediate controversy, but gradual habituation. When church leaders repeatedly hear that doctrine and moral norms should not be emphasized, the message sinks in. What once defined Catholic identity begins to feel negotiable. Teachings that shaped generations are treated as optional background noise. The Church does not become more missionary as a result. It becomes harder to distinguish from the surrounding culture. At its core, the issue raised by Fernandez's words is not about one individual or one speech. It is about the model of the Church that those words imply. A church in which proclamation is separated from the truth it proclaims. A church where encounter replaces conversion rather than leading to it. A church where doctrine is no longer the criterion by which pastoral action is judged, but a variable to be managed according to circumstance. When such a vision is articulated by the prefect responsible for doctrine, it cannot be dismissed as a passing remark. It points toward a deeper shift, one that continues to unsettle and divide the Catholic world. The tension it creates is not manufactured by critics. It arises naturally from the logic of the position itself. And as long as that logic remains unexamined, the questions it raises will not disappear. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment or comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.